Hey, and welcome to the Astro All-Stars podcast. And also, allow recording. Nicholas Polimenakos is joining me today, and I'm joining Nicholas because we are going to be sharing this video and audio to do with what we please on both of our channels. So we are a Sagittarius and a Gemini, and we are here to look back on what was the juggernaut of that very long and supernova Mars retro period in Gemini. So we've chosen today to record, or around this time at least, because Mars was also out of bounds and it's just come back in bounds today. So let's start first by saying hi to Nicholas. Hey, thanks for meeting up.
Yes, thank you for communicating to me behind the scenes to lead up to this. And for your fabulous pronunciation of my name.
You're welcome, Sag.
Yes,
Sag
my
skills.
first day of school was always interesting because they never got it right, and everybody looked back at me. And so, saying that too, that the fabulous, interesting timing that we decided to meet and talk about this, and wasn't thinking about this till like before we started recording. You mentioned to me how Mars wasn't out of bounds anymore. And I found that fascinating. I know we'll talk about that here. So, but yeah, it's really good to connect with you, Vanessa.
You too. So we had a little chitty chat behind the scenes. I was like, you know what? We should talk about this. Gemini, what happened for you? Because it was such a big retrograde. And for me, it was that it was also out of bounds. It was also in cheeky, mischief maker, the trickster, Gemini. And the Mercury was retrograde, wasn't it? At the time, the ruler was retrograde.
Actually,
Oh,
during the
yeah.
whole transit, there were several retrograde cycles that happened
There's a lot.
because, because Mars first went into Gemini was at the end of August of 2022, and there were several retrogrades that happened, Mercury retrogrades, during its long transit until it was done there pretty much in March. So, and I think that's what magnified the transit.
Seemed magnified.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
accentuated it. Yeah. And something that I think many of us who follow astrology or astrologers are studying, I think sometimes we don't give Mercury enough credit, even though we're talking about Mars here, but Mercury being the ruler of that Mars and Gemini transit and the power that Mercury has, we know the swiftness, and we know too in the broader sense of trends and social media and information. And for people who don't even know anything about astrology, if you were to say the word astrology, the first thing they're going to say, most likely, is say Mercury retrograde.
Exactly.
Whether they understand and even know what it is or not, that's what they're going to say. So I find it interesting that Mercury, in a sense, doesn't get the credit it deserves sometimes, and also on a mass level, with people who don't care about astrology, that's the first thing they will say.
It's crazy, isn't it? And then
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, there are other retrogrades like Mars every 2 years.
Mhm.
So just for people listening that are not sure what is Mars, is the action principle. It is about moving forward, being assertive, going after what you want, energy levels, and Mars rules sharp metal that cuts. I always like to remind
Yes.
myself of that as well. And so also separate, also moving forward, like moving out of the nest. You're going to use your Mars to get the heck out of there. So in Gemini, the sign of the trickster, it's about duality and twins. So doubles could be a feature. And it's an air sign. So communication, facts, and it's fast. So Mars in Gemini is very quick, and retrogrades are very slow, like a Lars von Trier film. There was one he did that was super slow. It was like slow motion. It's so frustrating for a Mars in Gemini. So frustrating. So I wanted to look back because of, continuity. Continuity is important. And, we're, as we were saying behind the scenes here, as astrologers and now with social media, we do feel the pressure to provide content, looking forward. People are wanting to know what's happening. And it's like that our culture of always chasing, fast, moving forward. And it doesn't make sense without looking back to give you that stability and roots. It's the best way to learn. And again, yeah, create that continuity. So that's what I also wanted to do with this, because it's a good learning moment. And I was super curious to talk to Gemini. Can I just call you Sparkles, Nicholas?
You can, for those, she's calling me Sparkles because my handle on the internet, I guess, is sparklesofgold.com. That's my YouTube channel, my Instagram. And so, yes, I have two names and I am a Gemini.
Exactly.
So, there you go. So yes, please, you call me Sparkles.
So Sparkles, you have Gemini rising as well, don't you?
I do not. I am a Taurus rising, but
oh, like me, right? We both are.
oh, see, I didn't know that.
Oh my God, twinning.
Yeah. I didn't catch that. I didn't know that either. Yeah, I'm a Gemini sun. I have Mercury in Gemini, and I also have Venus in Gemini.
Right.
So,
okay,
yes.
there you go. That's what it is. So
yeah.
I felt like there was still twinning because we're opposites, because I've got all of that in Sag, but the Taurus rising.
Yes.
So it sounds like you really got pretty hit by this one. Do you want to share some of it?
Yeah, that's one way to say
it.
I think, I had everything happen to me during this transit. And when I say everything, I'll break it down a little bit. From extreme euphoria, mental euphoria, to mental overload, and to, like, if you can imagine a car that was been driving for such a long time, and then it's lost its oil, and the engine's overheating.
Story of my life, literally.
Yeah, that's right, my fire friend. Yeah, those situations, but more, it was mentally happening to me. And not only that, I was seeing with my client base, and I saw these interesting overheating of the mental overheating happen in our mundane world level, especially in social media, whether it was anybody's post that I saw, or the people and the organizations that support or run some of our favorite social media networks.
Exactly.
Yes. So I know from when we got to the end of the summer here, there was a lot of movement and also building up of competition between social media networks, especially between Meta, who owns Facebook and owns Instagram, and the behemoth, or the new behemoth, that is TikTok. And so I found it interesting. There was a lot of experimentation last year, and especially when we got into summer and end of summer and going into this transit, where the algorithms were changing. They were experimenting with them, especially Facebook and Instagram. They were doing this, and then the competition, and there was failures, and times it was working well. There was people replying back towards Instagram, say they didn't like what was going on and what they were doing with more reels. That's one example of the type of communication challenges and overheating that was happening. But the other one, as you well know, Vanessa, has to do with Twitter.
Yes.
And yes.
And Elon Musk.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk.
So that's what really caught my eye more than anything. I always think Twitter is such a Gemini platform, and I never really used it much. I'm more of an Instagram pretty pictures kind of gal. And but I am trying Twitter. It's not really favoring me at the moment. But Elon Musk, I thought, I wonder if he has any planets in Gemini that this retrograde is going to hit. So I looked him up, and he has Venus in Gemini, and the Mars retrograde did go over that Venus. There was that, as well as other things happening in his chart. But a lot of the people that came up at the time, they did have something happening. I'll quickly jump to a few other examples, which was there are a lot of world leaders that suddenly stepped down during that period, whether it was the shadow periods or the retrogrades, including there was the whole Liz Truss thing, Boris Johnson in the UK. No faith vote, and then Liz Truss 45 days in office, then out. The Scottish PM, she stepped down. The New Zealand PM, she stepped down, all around this period. And I thought that was interesting. I'd love to know more about what's behind that. I mean, is that a coincidence or what's going on there? But the Twitter thing was definitely the biggest, I thought, there's just so much debacle. It was so dramatic.
Yeah, and we have an interesting situation too. It's funny with Elon's chart because it's very similar to mine.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I'll just say we are all born in the same year.
Mhm.
So, of course, Sparkles is closer to Elon, Elon being a Cancer. So he's just the next sign on from you.
Yeah, it
Yes.
was a couple of weeks
Interesting.
later he was born after me. So some of the
Interesting.
outer body stuff he has is there, the Saturn Jupiter opposition that's there, but he also, has Mars and Aquarius, which I know too because I have it. But anyway, I think, if we're to
Hmm.
say anything about Elon, it has to do with like he also, I don't know if he's claimed to be neurodivergent
I
or
think he has, or maybe people just say that about him.
yeah, I think he's hinted at it, but I think you see it in his actual tweets. You saw it to the lead up to him, proposing to acquire Twitter, and then the moves to buy up all the shares that he could, then eventually going forward, then pulling back and trying to get out of the deal, then being forced into the
Yes.
deal because he got it sued. I mean, just that alone. And then we get into the actual acquiring of it and the constant, I'm going to be real. I'm just going to speak my mind and my truth. I see constant mishaps, not only with his tweets, but what happened behind the scenes, even from getting rid of certain people who are the backbone of Twitter to take care of the technology parts of it so it's running correctly and firing them and letting go, and then outages that were happening during the day and mishaps with subscription models and taking them away and putting them back. I mean,
Yes.
it just is on. It's almost every day, Vanessa.
It's
I
like a
swear.
farce. Like it's
Yeah.
that whole thing, truth is stranger than fiction. It's so dramatic.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, if we get into the interesting political end of all this, was one of his premises that he was coming in is like to have the truth be seen because there was a whole different factions.
Yes.
We could fill in the blanks on some of those factions. We're saying, it's not freedom of speech and so on and so forth because the Twitter before had councils overseeing things. They were dealing with abuse on Twitter and having certain types of not just the algorithm, but people overseeing that and making sure things were cleaned up in a certain way. And that all kind of brewed up and led into a situation where he was representing the free speech of Twitter. And that's one of the
Apparently.
reasons why he was to acquire it, was to open that up,
Mm.
for the benefit of us all and free
Mm.
speech, which is sounds good on paper, right? But one of the things that ended up happening was he started canceling people out on Twitter.
Yes, that made fun of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then they made more fun of him. So he got lambasted, roasted more and more
More.
continually.
And
And
it's even,
I'll
go
remind
ahead.
people he spent $44 billion for this, serious money. And one of the main reason he wanted to back out was he felt that they weren't honest or clear about the number of bots. So
Yes.
again, with this tricks, I think the bots are like the tricksters. Like they're not real, they're tricksters. He's paying for something like empty nothingness. It's an inflated price because of that.
Yeah, and
Perhaps it was there's a lot of dodginess and toing and froing and movement, which is so that Gemini too, like what you're saying, there's so much movement, that backwards, forwards. That staff, I think they were cutting like at a time 50% of the overall staff. I think he's ended up with 20% of what they had in staff.
yeah. They even the PR department with any like reporters or anybody you want to get things, they completely lost it. And they had nobody, and the replies were like from a 12-year-old snarky replies on a tweet. It's interesting too because we can't remember, we don't want to forget what in a sense Gemini does too, and like what it rules, and what Mercury that is the ruler of Gemini rules, and it's commerce. It's how purchases and goods get exchanged and go from back and forth from A to B.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about this, and one of the biggest things I think that was unforeseen for him and his team, was that they would lose advertising. and that was one of the fundamental backbones of any kind of income coming into Twitter, but that they would lose this, and they still have people hanging around, but they have a lot of advertisers and big corporations that stepped out and were like watching to see what was going to happen. And there's still some have gone back, but some still have not come back to spend the ad money, and they're not, and some are leaving or have left because of what has happened as of recently, when we're dealing with the blue Twitter check marks, the paying for them. Also, Twitter, Elon, so on and so forth, designating certain news organizations in a different way, was almost mocking them, and they decided to step out. So this has been brewing. It went all the way from the beginning here, from all last year when we started this transit in August. When we get to, October, it was when Mercury stationed retrograde. I think that's when certain reality started to hit Twitter. And I want to say something to go back to how you started this, because you're saying Twitter is kind of a Gemini thing. And I've always thought the same, Vanessa. I always thought that it was air and fire.
Right? Air and anger, angry tweets.
Yeah, angry tweets, inflated situations. Once air touched the fire, that it inflames things. It propagates. It multiplies. And there's we can have opinions on this, because in a sense, over the years, I'm sure, depending on one's way they look at Twitter, who they follow, there's been maybe productive discourse, we could say, right?
Yeah.
And also in the past, we've had Twitter became, and still, it's not really the same anymore, but it was the de facto, when it came to social media, the de facto place for anything in the world that was happening news-wise in the moment. It was born through Twitter.
That's I thought that was particularly interesting too. Read journalism, news reporters. It's so Gemini, off to the Sag, but I always think it's much more Gemini. So when we start bringing news into it, and it being a real platform and the birthplace of this news, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Really interesting. And I also will bring in the Sag part that you said, because a lot of times certain conversations that would happen over a breaking news story, you would see debate of truth. You would see the philosophizing about certain news situations. And hence, you could think of it a little bit of Sag there, right? This is, and it's interesting if we think about polarity signs like Gemini and Sag. This is what they do with each other, not necessarily opposing each other all the time.
It's like throwing I see it as throwing a ball. Like, I'll throw it to you, you throw it back. And it's like they're yang signs. And to me, that means you have to get it out. You're not like processing it as much inside. You have to get it out. You need a response. You see it back. Okay, we change it a little. And I love doing that too. I'm not scared to say something it might be the stupid thing, or I know it's not quite right or PC, but we've got to start somewhere to get it to another place. So I really enjoy doing that as well. And I know, my Gemini friends are usually able to just go there and throw that ball. Like, they'll catch it, throw it back.
Yeah, because other times it's not working with other signs and whatever the rest of their charts are, it's in their chart. But you're absolutely right. There's actually, I think, many threads between those two signs, and they need each other, and they're learning. So we're talking energetically about Twitter and certain things, and then we have a long Mars and Gemini story here, and I brought up the engine overheating. And then the timing of this
breakdown on the side of the road. Serious.
Many breakdowns. It's actually like the car's driving with no wheels at this point, and the doors have fallen off.
Steam's coming out of the hood. It's already crumpled from so many bings and bangs. Crazy.
And it's somehow still going. But to go back, to Elon too, though, I think here with the way his mind is, and what has happened along with it, and what he's in a sense representing, again, this is my opinion. Some might disagree with this, but to come in with the premise of being a free and clear speech, but then it being manipulated on his end with the company, and in a sense opening up a door for others who were kicked off the platform that were in a sense claiming not to have free speech, but a lot of the speech that was said based on misinformation and verbal abuse. Like a lot of what happened before with Twitter was sold, a lot of what Twitter was trying to do. They saw the effects that happened, especially with the political campaigns that happened in the Brexit time and here in the United States with Trump.
Exactly.
There was a lot of byproduct, and part of that byproduct, I think, had to do with how we are deal with certain groups, especially marginalized groups.
Yeah.
You know, and Twitter was, they took steps after they saw the damage that was happening, and many other facets of people who in a sense were kicked out or saying, oh, we can't speak our truth or so on and so forth. They were shunned out because it's passed beyond speech. Is like, you know, if someone's saying something and it's abusive and it can be detrimental to someone's being.
Yeah, and it's fostering hate. Like, you know, we have that term hate speech now, and fostering hate to communities that are the traditional ones that are kicked further down the road. You know, it's easy to pile on because it's already set there in our culture that, you know, they're no good, or these are the ones that you differentiate yourself from, or you stand on their head to make yourself different. And I thought that was super interesting too. And there was just a lack of responsibility. So for me, that's Saturn. And I think you and you probably have, do you have the Saturn in Gemini as well?
No, I'm just before. I'm Saturn and Taurus. Yeah,
I've got
because it
Saturn
switches
in
up.
opposite my Sun Sag. So I do actually have that axis connected. So it's opposite my Sun Neptune, actually exactly opposite the Neptune, Saturn and Neptune doing their thing together.
Yes.
And I feel like, yeah, that's really bringing that Saturn responsibility into Twitter. Like Twitter had needed to grow up, and it was a real maturing moment, but it went back into adolescence. In a way,
you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that now. And I was thinking at the time, everyone's giving Musk grief, but maybe he does have a bigger picture for this. Like there was talk of his company he started ages ago, and it did actually merge. I'll just look for my notes. He has like a financial side, like he wanted to monetize Twitter and have it, you know, he's got this vision and, you know, worthy vision, because there's a lot of change at the moment. But this does bring in that mercurial financial aspect that you're talking about. That's a really good point, that he wants it to be a real hub for commerce.
Yeah.
Because there's so much connectivity already on there. It's ready to go. So he has merged that company in, I think, late in the game.
Yeah, and they're currently trying to, and this has to do with either the official blue check marks, what the API, as they call it, which is the backbone that other social media services or programs that we pay for to schedule social media and all that, they're using the back end of the API, whether they were paying for it or not before, I can't remember. But a lot of it was free because I had apps that were helping me watch my Twitter feed when I was really watching it, but they took that away. And they like asking for more money for people to pay so they can build apps based on the API, things like that. You know, there's been a shutdown, and at the same time, he's trying to find the money to pay for things and to pay for the $44 billion investment in things. You know, I think it's, again, with a Mars retrograde and the amount of time, 7 months almost, from Mars being in Gemini, there are things that are going to be opened up and put back together again, and experimentation. Gemini energy is going to go here and there. They're going to look at all different types of information, all different types of conduits and vessels of knowledge, and quickly, and they're going to skim the surface on all of them and see what can work and what flows. But what I think happened during during the retrograde was a little too much of that. A little too much.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot of tweaking and a lot of like experiment going on, and I mean, it's good to do that, you know, to have a mutable energy, to have a shift and have different perspectives and do it on the fly. That's what Gemini does so well. But if Mars is in there and it's not in there just for a month and a half, 2 months, it's there for 7 months, it's like, it's going to break down. It's going to overload. And I could say this not just with Twitter, but like even with all the communicative process of social media, how we started talking about this, TikTok, all that, there was a lot of tweaking going on algorithmically with everything. And the byproduct of that was a lot of people who were they got used to doing things, let's say on Instagram, right? for instance, they figured out with certain hashtags, and instead of a one picture post, a carousel, that was the norm, and that was a way of doing things. Then Instagram was losing to TikTok, and then they decided to tweak the algorithm, and carousels, it wasn't working anymore. And then all these people were having their financial basis built up, and they were making money on this. All of a sudden, it's just dropping.
Yep.
Dropping for them. And then all these other people are coming up through reels, and there was this movement happening, and it still has happened.
The reels. So, good point. Yeah. More movement and action, and forcing everyone to take some kind of action and try something new, try something different. Everyone's having to shuffle around. That's true. The movement side is huge. Yeah.
Now, for those of you watching and listening, with your individual selves and chart, some of you are probably have it in you to move from here to there. Maybe your Mercury is an immutable sign, right? Maybe you got Mars in Gemini. But there's a lot of you out there that don't have that, understand that swiftness. And so, to be affected by that, and let's say you're a person who is kind of forced into the different algorithm, you're like, you don't know what to do. And you can't move with the wind changing, literally.
It is, so, yes, exactly.
It's not just one person, a couple people, the CEOs or people behind the scenes are deciding something. I truly think they don't understand the effects of things, but they did, and they started to get blowback. Instagram was getting it from the users and even from celebrities. They're like, "What are you doing? Like, I don't want it to look like a TikTok feed."
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So it's again, can one mutate and move with it? Some of us are good at it, and a lot of us, it's a new language.
Yeah.
So I think definitely during the Mars and Gemini transit, that was accentuated.
Huge. That was definitely one of the biggest headlines. And the other big headline, let's go to that one, ChatGPT.
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Well, first one released, and then this year, I think it was in March, the next phase of it. So large language models, generative large language models, that's huge news. And I think that I think a lot of people, and most people, don't even understand the implications of what this means. And Lensa also happened, that stable diffusion AI, which is all the portraits that flooded everything all of a sudden. So you've got, text to
Midjourney's the other company, that there's a bunch out there. And mind you, they excuse me, a lot of these people, it was getting developed for years. Just wasn't popular. Tech people and the nerds, and even venture capitalism money, who have the money, they're watching what's going on. But when summer hit last year, and then we had Mars come into Gemini, everything became open and public, and it was people like,
it was just like, be free, birdies.
Be free. What can I type into this, like, one simple page, and people start typing in. I'll say, I remember one night I wrote top 10 titles said in a intelligent and strategic way, astrological, blah, 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 or some query that I did. And I got 10 YouTube titles for videos, and 7 out of the 10 were like, those could work.
I tried it out too. Like earlier on, I looked into it, and then I'm like, no, I don't want to go into this wormhole yet. So I came back to it after this latest kind of version of ChatGPT 4, and I tested it for the astrology. And it was pretty good. I asked it some career advice. I asked it things about my chart. I asked it to write a horoscope for a particular thing. Very interesting. I had to go through and change things. Some things it got wrong, but I was surprised at how much it knew. I was very surprised. I just thought, well, I have to know, because this is potentially my competition now. Where is it at? Where is it at with the astrology? Very interesting. Lots of fun. I really enjoyed it. And Yeah, I thought it was getting a lot of grief for not being that ethical, but I found it to be really ethical. So I think that might have been Bing. So I looked into
Yes.
Microsoft's Bing, which is the competition for Google. I think Microsoft's got it's very low, 4% of the search engine, something. It's very low. And then Google's got the rest. So it's like, right, we're merging this generative AI with the search engine. And then Nicholas, I saw that you posted something in your stories yesterday, and I clicked on your articles that you'd linked, and it was this guy that's left Google. I mean, he's retired because he's 75,
Yeah.
but he's just like, this could be a real problem because it can make up things and get things wrong, and you might not know what the truth of things are. And interesting. Anyway, he said
His name is Jeffrey Hinton. And
yes,
he's in his 70s or 80s, and he's known as
75.
the godfather of AI. And he basically Monday publicly said something about how this could be disastrous, the AI model, and he was been wanting to talk about this. He was still working for Google and other, connected to other people, but he had to actually quit so he can talk publicly and say his opinion of it. And he basically was comparing himself to Oppenheimer, who developed the atomic bomb. It was wild. The quote he used, he was talking about like, I won't get this quote right exactly, but he was, after Oppenheimer came up with the atomic bomb and saw the result of that, he was just so guilty conscious, and he was trying to talk to the president of the United States like, this is a no-no, like, it's too late though. And he's coming with the same attitude, like, what have I created? What have I done? At the same time, we need to stop, because he was talking about, because of capitalistic competition, especially with Microsoft, by the way, because you brought up, they made the deal with ChatGPT, right? And Google's been working on their Bard. They call theirs Bard. There's like 6 different main ones. So because of what happens in our computer age with competition and with money and how things move so fast, that we are not vetting the process. We're not watching. We're not really meditating and thinking on the consequences of our actions and what's the byproduct of something like this, which is actually so Gemini, because it's like, and I'm a Gemini, and I'm saying this not to, Gemini's got their unbalanced side. And to me, this goes into an unbalanced side. It's like, you're not thinking hard enough, long enough.
Because the Sagittarius, the polarity is looking into the future. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm like thinking, oh my gosh, we've seen enough on social media and the problems that are happening, like the great stuff, but the problems are very problematic. And this is just, it's the next level of a technology. And we're old enough to have seen very disruptive technologies come through, and we know what life was like before that. So we know
totally
impact that it can have. So here we are, we're at the forefront again. It's another Wild West, and it will change things. And just how many people don't understand that until it's actually affecting them.
It's hard when you're trying to chase money. It always blinds people. It all blinds us on some level. Competition and money.
West.
And shareholders and everything's on the line, and we got to do this first before someone else. Ethics? What about ethics?
Google has to compete now. Google is working on their version.
Yeah, and the CEO of Alphabet, or of Google, he recently, for those listening, you could find it on YouTube. There's the interview that a local news network of here in the United States, CBS, they have a program called 60 Minutes. They interview him. This was about a month ago, and they were talking about the ethical parts of it. And he's like, well, we're trying to be slow. We're not releasing our full version, Bard for Google. We're not releasing the full version yet, but we want to be careful. But he's trying to take that approach. But honestly, they're getting their behinds kicked by the other people, and there's a lot of pressure. And so here's this main old school godfather of AI scientist who had to leave Google, and he's just like, I don't like what's going on. It needs to slow down. We need to take a break. And there was other scientists in the field that released this mass press release where all these scientists and people in the tech world who are wanting and asking for it to slow down too. But it was just a blip in the news reel, whatever.
And it's big news. It's one of those things in the future, people will look back at that, I think, and just be like, oops, a daisy. But at the time, people don't understand it yet.
Well, check this out. I mean, we're talking about this, but I also put up a post on my stories that in April 30th of 1993 was the World Wide Web was released in the public domain. There's this whole article. This is basically how many years ago is that? 30 years ago?
I think, Nelly.
Yeah. It's like a Saturn cycle almost, pretty much. So I just found it fascinating. I read that article yesterday, today, and then here we are now. If we think about everything that's happened from then till now and the acceleration of things, in the end, well, not, I won't say in the end, but to bring it back to this Mars and Gemini thing. Because yes, Vanessa, we're like, well, Mars is in Cancer now. Why do we care? Mars is going to Leo here very soon in May, right? Why are we looking back? And as astrologers and people learning out there and people with experience, we always want to look back because we don't know everything when we're looking at the transits. We know what we've taught and our experience with our clients or books and webinars that we go to. But I think the biggest thing, and you brought this up before we went live on air, Vanessa, because you're the one who said this, is like, I like to go back too, but recently, especially with a transit like Mars and Gemini, was so long, so to go look back, not to go, maybe we'll look back in 6 months, maybe next year, but let's look back recently. Let's not go too far Gemini-like with our brains and what happened to us. Let's take a step back and look, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At the byproduct. So, and I'm glad. And here it was today. You mentioned, Mars is finally out of bounds, even though it's in the sign of Cancer. It is still part of the cycle because, and I'm sure I know you have stuff to say on that. So,
I will say I looked at that article you're talking about as well, because you posted two, and it was this one. Yeah. So I looked up the guys in the article and their charts to see, is there any Gemini? What's going on? Mm-hmm. So Tim Berners-Lee is that guy who kind of thought of the internet. And I was reading quotes on that article and I'm thinking, this sounds so Gemini. So I look him up and he is a Gemini, right? He is... where is it? Sun 16 Gemini, Mercury also in Gemini at 28. And this is a quote from the article that you posted, Nicholas, that he said, almost everything which you needed to know in your daily life was written down somewhere. And at the time in the 1980s, it was almost certainly written down on a computer somewhere. It was very frustrating that people's effort in typing it in was not being used when, in fact, if it could only be tied together and made accessible, everything would be so much easier for everybody. So to me, that's so Gemini, like there's all this disparate information. How can we pull it all together so everyone has access to the information? And of course, it was a Gemini with Mercury and Gemini that was thinking along these lines. So yeah, super interesting and great article to post. I thought you were really onto it. I'm like, tuning into our chat.
It's total Gemini thing is like, we could have used this or used that because we save time. In the end, it's just like, let's just get straight to it, or like, the most quickest way to something to acquire or grab information. That means if we can make it as quick as possible, that means we could do multiple things as quick as possible.
Exactly. And Gemini. And also a little bit more background on this guy, Tim Berners-Lee. He was a scientist at CERN, so pretty high level already. Yeah, super interesting. And then there's a chart for the actual internet too, which didn't have Gemini, but I did think this was interesting that it's got Mercury's in Aries and Venus is in Aries. It does have a Gemini. It has the south node in Gemini. The internet does have the south node in Gemini, meaning the north is certainly in Sagittarius. But that Mercury in Aries, with how things are going with and the Venus in Aries, they would say in detriment, and what we've started to see where it's been shifting to, so literally like hate speech, so much anger, a lot of fighting, and the whole internet, as wonderful as it is, the price that we're starting to pay is all that splitting and polarization and fighting, and literally, it's been used for all sorts of dastardly deeds in other countries as experiments. And
Yeah,
Aries.
it's like if I was developing something and we're like, math mind and algorithms and all that. And I know there's been many people in our history, especially in the technological revolution that's happening within less than 100 years here, that had the intentions, good intentions, of like, this is what we can do as a society. And
Exactly.
listen, there's so much good stuff that's happened because of technology. We wouldn't be able to to do this recording. I'm on the other side of the world.
We would not even have met or know each other. I know so many great
Yeah,
things, and I
yeah,
love it. And here's that Gemini Sag nodal axis as well as connecting
yeah,
people, which is brilliant. But
yeah. But the byproduct is to remember that human beings are faulty and they do nasty things, dumb things, either purposely or they don't subconsciously. They didn't know what they had a hold of power wise, right? So they make something, do something, byproducts. We didn't think about this. I mean, this is just being part of being human, but I think I'm going to bring two things in here to my thing. Mars being in Gemini that whole time, it I'm the type of astrologer, whenever Mars is part of the story, which it usually is, I'm also going to go look to where Venus is, and I'm going to look to the relationship between Mars and Venus always, because they're either trying to kiss or they're mad at each other or they're at the table talking to each other. So for me, if I think about this, a lot of what happened last year from August, and it's even till now at this moment, for that whole transit until Mars left Gemini and Cancer, we had several Mercury retrogrades. We had eclipses that happened in the sign of North Node Taurus and Scorpio. Let's remember, Taurus is ruled by Venus, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. The lunations that we had there, the Aries lunations that we're having are ruled by Mars. We want to look at this breakdown and how the effect of Mars in many of the transits that were happening. And sometimes we forget that, But I think here, a lot of times, to bring in Venus here, and Venus is trying to talk to Mars like, hey, you don't have to do it this way, Mars and Gemini, you're in overload mode. And maybe you could feel it this way or do it this way, or can I try to help harmonize the situation? And we had a bunch of fire planets this year, Jupiter and Aries. We had the reason why I brought this up is because you were mentioning Venus in Aries and Mercury in Aries earlier this year, and I'm thinking they're part of the game here because they're the ones fueling the Mars and Gemini too. So it's like, it's these types of relating things of going quick, fast, and hot at times with those planets in Aries, feeding the Mars and Gemini. And, and what happens in those situations is things get blown out and they lose focus. And there's too many things were started. And it's like, how do you get that back together? Or what do you do with the remnants of something like that? And I actually think now, even as we speak, Vanessa, with Mars coming out of bounds in Cancer, I think we're actually realizing and seeing the remnants
like
right of the transit Mars through Gemini. So
it definitely feels like it's moved on a bit. And that idea of, well, why look back as well? Like these things they were initiated or instigated or they blew up at a certain point, but they don't just stop when Mars moves on. They are going to now progress from that birthing point. That's why it's so interesting when you see more in the story, like you look up charts like Elon and, oh yes, it is affecting the Mars does hit his chart and Twitter is Gemini, and these things go off at that certain point, and then we're going to move on from there. But what they're signaling very clearly is a significant change. So we can map it back to that significant point with this kind of looking at this retrograde and understand that this is significant. It's not just like a Twitter storm. There's going to be permanent change with social media. And then, like Nicholas, Sparkles, you were mentioning all of the other ones have to then adapt and catch up and compete because they're all commercial businesses and it's capitalism and that's the structure. And TikTok's winning at the moment. And Yeah, they want to make money out of it. So it's being more and more commercialized, and their view is to, the user pays, and trying to find ways to do that. And I think it's funny, like people are so detached on, or like not grounded at these levels that make these decisions. They're thinking that people might like some stickers that they pay for, or it's like, what are we to? Like,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
dumb. All I can
Yeah.
say is they need regular people living in the regular world to perhaps be advisors, would be a great idea. And here's Gemini again with communication, a bit more realistic on the ground, someone that can go between the two types of levels. That's very mercurial as well. Like, imagine if you and I were giving them advice, it would be so much different to literally the richest person in the world who would not have much idea about how people use this or rely on it for their business or the social side, or I also wanted to, I'll just say this, I want to comment on what you're saying with how dangerous it can all be. It's very, or like idealistic, I should say. All people always have the best intentions, it's true, and they'll sell it on the ideal because we all want that. We want that hope and that belief and that beautiful side. Maybe it's a bit Neptunian, but it's very naive. And again, like you and I are getting like decades under our belt, and I feel like we've all learned a lot over the last, like it's so accelerated because it's been such a massive social experiment we've all been privy to, people that can afford the internet and a computer to watch it on. I've learned so much about humans, and I'm very idealistic too, not completely naive, but Sagittarius, year of the pig, like we're both year of the pig, which are kind of naive sign, it's like they just want a nice cup of tea and count their gold coins, really. Be comfortable. So it's taught me a lot, and I'm far less naive, and I feel like I've taken on that need for, and here's that Saturn coming in and my own opposition of Saturn in Gemini, how responsible we have to be. And it's fun to play fast and loose with things, but a lot of people don't get the context. I'm Sag, and the Gemini, we want to have fun and be silly with it and exaggerate for drama, not to lie, but to make a story and make it fun. But that's not flying because people take it seriously, like Gemini Trump telling people to drink bleach, and they did. Like, you can't, you have to be like a boring Saturn sometimes, and I'm really taking that on because it's been so extreme, and it's been a real wake-up call, at least for me. And I hope that comes into, I guess that's maturity, isn't it? And if Twitter matures and if these things mature, I hope they do, because I think that like, the whole social everything, relies on that happening.
Yeah, I feel what you're saying in agreement too about structure. Even for us mutable people, doesn't mean you still can't have fun and stuff. But we even know, you and I know, and we have enough knowledge now because we've outed our age here on this podcast and video. We pretty much, we're in between generations, right? So it's like, could we tell Elon, all these people, like, hey, what are you doing with the sticker thing? At the same time, we're like, maybe the sticker thing is work. They're looking at somebody 20 years younger than us.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something shifting and going back and forth, like you talked about, on a deeper Hermes mercurial way too, if we're thinking about this transit and what's happened in the byproduct. And we let's remember that Gemini goes back and forth to Mount Olympus, back and forth to the underworld.
It's a lot of
There's
that.
one other goddess who can go back and forth to the underworld, by the way, that goes back and forth, and that's Hecate, which the triple goddess. But let's not forget about her, okay? Because she's a major thing. But this thing of going back into the underworld too, and Hermes shepherding people. He's the only one who knows how to get to the underworld. Besides Hecate knows too, but by myth, he's the only one who knows. And we could say he or she here, because let's get this straight too about Gemini is androgynous in its ways, and it can move, and it's trickster in even that way, right?
Yeah. I gender everything she anyway. I mix it up. They don't have a gender.
That's why I'm like, Hermes don't get enough credit, okay? So anyway,
it's true. I think people forget that part about Hermes. It is, and the same. Yeah, it's back and forth. It's back and forth. It's going back. It's trying this, but doesn't stay there.
Yeah, it doesn't stay there. A lot of times when we look at astrology, we can look in the more modern view, like Pluto's bringing the death and regeneration process. True. If we go old school in astrology, we could think of Saturn was the last visible planet body we could see, and it was the limit and everything that was on the other side of the limit. And it's connected to time and even death, mortality. But, I think Hermes has its way of the messenger of change. And a lot of times the messenger of change has to do with death. He's leading them into the underworld. So I'm always saying this about what you said, like the energy, because if we think about this Mars and Gemini transit and what was happening, there is a ending happening. And I think this Mars and Gemini transit showed it with social media and how we've been communicating on planet Earth. Yeah, these companies are trying to survive, but everyone I've talked to mostly, they're looking for something else. They almost know that not only is Twitter done and will never be the same, Instagram's kind of falling out. TikTok is peaking, but that's not going to last. As a matter of fact, if things happen here in the United States, they might have to sell the company and they might be banned. So I think inherently on a deep, deep level, the way we've been integrating and communicating with each other is going through a death process.
Yeah.
There's something new coming our way. We're all looking for it. What's the new thing, right? But on a deep, deep level, as a collective, Mars and Gemini, I think heralded this. We can bring in Pluto and Aquarius. What's happening?
Herald.
Right?
Good point. Good word.
Yeah, heralded it. And it's like it's this thing. I don't think the more we're going to look back on this. I'm so glad, Vanessa, that you and I were talking about this and we got to this point of talking publicly. Because I think to understand a movement and death and rebirth process, that there's many different factors, at least in myth, but Hermes is right there the whole time. So you got to respect it, at least honor it out there, honor it and understand, like, the wacky Gemini energy for 7 months, it drove me crazy. It was like, it felt like one big long Mercury retrograde, like, and all the mishaps and people losing their mind and possibly money and all these stuff. Imagine what was going on in relationships and people communicating with each other. I know, I heard it, but we want to look for the gold. And a lot of times it's by a conversation you and I are having right now and looking back.
Exactly. This is where it's really handy. I always recommend keeping a diary, even just a general diary. I'm just keeping it on my iPad now of the transits that go through, like major ones, and then points that happen during them. So I was making some of those with this Mars retrograde. I could have done more. Like I noted the Elon Musk stuff as it went through. There was a huge, in the US, there were all these flights that couldn't go. There was this big travel situation.
It was a 24 hours where they shut down the whole system.
That's really extreme. So that happened, of course, in Mars retrograde in Gemini. The ChatGPT, massive game changer. And I think that's the thing that's coming that we don't realize. The other thing was, the big headline that I noticed at the time and managed to write down was the Andrew Tate versus Greta Thunberg.
He got
again on Twitter. It broke on Twitter. It was this little battle. Greta won, Andrew Tate 0. Next day, he and his brother, so you have the twins, there's always two, get arrested and put in a Romanian freaking jail. He gave himself away with too much hubris. So I looked up his chart, and he's a Sag.
Wait a second, Vanessa. Let's say
it was exactly opposite his sun.
And let's remember how he gave himself away.
Yes.
How's that happen?
Pizza
Remember,
box.
He was going back and forth with Greta, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Vanessa.
No, go.
He was going back and forth with Greta, and there was this picture, and there was a picture there, and they saw these pizza boxes on the table of the picture, or in the picture on the table where he's at, and that's how the Romanian authorities found him, because they looked at what was on the pizza box.
So funny.
And I just belly ached, laughed. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. We just
hilarious though. Exactly. Yeah. That's a huge part of the story, that he was being all strutting around, thinking he's so great and putting her down. And like the real low end of, he's got Sun and Moon conjunct at 9 Sag. The low end of Sag when young and stupid Sagittarius, I've been one. I know what it feels like. It feels great when you're like on fire and you're like all puffed up, and I've never been quite that mean, but I know the vibe, and it backfired because it was opposition. Like, he's not going to win against Mars. Mars just came and slammed him, and I hope he's learned a lesson from it. And of course, the stuff he was caught on was Marsy stuff. Like, he was accused of sex trafficking, all these sorts of things, which I think is like that abuse of, say, a Mars side of things. So very serious. And Greta just like in these quick tweets, I think she was having pretty good transits at the time. Don't mess with a young Capricorn. And he just went down. Like, he just had nothing. And
yeah, he just was dismantled within one tweet. And I'm gonna say, let's be real, dude, the guy is a massive misogynist.
And that's what he's become known for. Exactly. So again, the low end of the Mars.
Purposely preaching that, through content and through followers. And it's so interesting that it's all happening on Twitter.
Twitter again, exactly.
That almost there within that particular situation that you're talking about was like a representation of the type of Twitter vibe that has happened, and the transition that happening with Mars and Gemini into Twitter. It's just wild.
So fast. Yeah. The fact that it happened so quickly as well.
Yep.
And of course, that retrograde was hitting up his chart so significantly, because that's how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gonna sound like a tangent, but let's bring this up because Elon's chart, he's got Mercury in Cancer. He's got Mercury in Cancer here, and he's got the Sun in Cancer, and he's got Venus in Gemini here. The reason why I'm bringing up the Cancer stuff here is because now Mars has been in Cancer and Venus is about to be here. And I think this is how astrology works. There's chapters of a story. And so he had the major Mars influence on his chart of this Mars in Gemini, but he's got to have the next step here that's happened. That this Mars in Cancer, Venus in Cancer, its movement of the story is about to go over his Sun. And most importantly, his Mercury. And Mars has already come over across his Mercury. And if you just think about the headlines last month, by the way, that's a whole different story. He's going to talk about the missile or the launch that crashed. Or whatever.
Just thought of that. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, but that was a retrograde moment. And they used this PR saying that was supposed to happen that way, and they applauded it, right? But it was like, listen, anybody out there who's running a company, I'm going to be real here with you, okay? Anybody listening, running a company, you're going to launch a major app or a software update, or you're going to launch a rocket into space. Will you hire an electional astrologer to help guide you? To help with at least the best timing possible. Because I just have to say this, like Apple, though they have a history for whatever reason, I always notice they will release major updates to their iOS during a retrograde. It's like, and then there's these bugs happening. I'm just like always shaking my head. I just have to say that, Vanessa. So anyway, I to go back to Twitter and timing and swiftness. And I can't let this one go. I have to say this too. You were talking earlier about it was interesting to do your queries in the ChatGPT about astrology. And I was doing some of those too. This past weekend, I was at a podcast convention and I didn't know anybody there, which was perfect. And there was one particular woman who was really dialed in on the podcast scene and with AI. And she basically told a story, how she took 3 TikTok videos from her friend, an email that her friend wrote to her, and they used AI, the voice from the 3 TikToks, they recreated her voice, and that voice read an email that was sent to her, and they used it for an auto-generated podcast. So it sounded like her, and it sounded real. And it was like, the reality hit me. And the reason why I'm bringing this up to you is we see the benefits of ChatGPT. We see all this stuff, but we're really getting into a place of non-reality, or what is real,
Yes.
what is not. And not only that, job loss.
Yeah,
I
huge. They're thinking
huge.
300 million.
Yep, huge. Like anyway, to go back to, we're going to look at some, oh, it's just Mars and Gemini transit. It's like, it's no
Was so
joke here.
significant. People don't
Huge.
realize. People do
Yep.
not realize. That's why I wanted to have this chat. It is so significant. And yes, I forgot that bit. It's the deep fake. They barely need anything of your voice to recreate it.
Yeah.
They can make your face. I mean, it still looks a bit strange, the visual stuff. Like, I'll just tangent a bit on this. It's obviously at an amazing stage now, but it's going to get a lot better a lot faster. It's already so close to being, it seems,
Well,
final.
you know how it's going to get better. And this is another reason I'm bringing this back to you, because it's something that you mentioned. Because you did some astrological query. You're doing Gemini stuff, and then you're coming back and you're
We're
like,
training
and
it.
wrong. It was wrong, and I corrected it. So this weekend at the podcast convention, they were telling us there's nothing you could do about copyright. If it's out there, it's out there, and it's in the algorithm. It's out there in the thing. So, and I can understand where she was coming from, and I agree with this, because she's coming from a marginalized community. And so if anybody's querying and it's wrong, marginalized communities need to start typing in and correcting what is in the chat GPT. So when people are querying, the correct things are out there, and it demands that the user interfaces,
We're training it.
trains it.
Well, I didn't correct it in the app. That's the thing, because I don't want to train it and make it better.
Well, that's the
I
other
just did
point
it
I
as
was
an
getting to.
experiment. So I took it onto my iPad and I
Right.
worked through it to see
Oh, Vanessa, I dig you so much, because you saw the other part of it too, of like, is anybody going to hire us anymore? It's like, there's
do they need to? I wanted to see if it was good enough to replace us. What do they still need us for? And it did still need me to correct things, thankfully.
Yeah. And they want us to do that. That's why it's open right now. Everybody's typing it. It's because it's learning constantly. It's training itself.
Oh my God, that's so just sci-fi. I watch a lot of sci-fi.
I know.
It's all
Well,
coming true.
well, one more. I'll say this. I'm sorry. My brain's popping right now. It's popping off. I think
So
here.
Gemini.
Yeah, and I know you're gonna dig this. I know you'll have something here for this one, Vanessa. But when I saw them recreate that voice thing, the first thing that came up in me was rebellion. And it was like, I saw it all at once, like all this happening, and I saw a rebellious part of the world, or people that were like, this is happening, it will be happening, and then demanding, I want the voice to be real. I want to know that the voice and the face and the knowledge I'm accepting is real. Give me the real organic thing that in itself could actually make a comeback. Face-to-face conversations again, which they are happening, coming out of a pandemic.
Yeah.
But all these things, that there actually might be a faction of humans that don't get caught up in this, and they're going to be like double downing on the opposite.
There's definitely some people, like I have one friend that is not on social media at all, and she gets by just fine.
Yeah.
But most people are. Most people are. I think there will still be a lot of people on it, but there might be some sort of, like, I know some younger people, their phone etiquette is at dinner, they all put their phones in a bowl or on the table or in a pile. If anyone uses their phone, they have to basically not pay a fine, but they have to shout everyone something. There's just that etiquette around it. But I think that it's like when mobile phones came through, everyone's got one. There's very few people that are going to be like, I'm not going to use it. So I honestly think a lot of people, it's going that way. I'm concerned about the fake, the trickster element, the fake stuff. And I want to say, I look at some, there's so much content already out there of the Lensa type, like the stable diffusion visual stuff. It's cold. You can pick it because it's cold. There's a lifelessness about it that gives me a bad vibe. Like my energy goes down, like my physical response goes down. And I looked at something where they were trying to see, can you see which is the real ones and which isn't? So they had 3 pictures of, it was like some sort of a leopard or something. And I picked it because it was too perfect. The others didn't look as perfect. But it was close. It was so close. And if someone hadn't pointed out that one is fake, I just would have brushed past it and thought it was a real picture, probably.
Yeah.
But in people particularly, there's something in my primal brain that knows that's not real. So if you listen to your body, maybe it can trick your conscious mind, but it cannot trick your body, because there's part of you that knows everything. The mystic, is it mystic or is it primal? But there's part of you that knows. And I think that the way our society goes is trying to really focus on that cognitive bit that can be tricked, which is, higher executive kind of functioning, which we all need. I'm not dissing it, but without the greater part of you that is that mystic or animal side, it's the same thing, really. Who knows? I don't know. That is your God. You need to listen to that thing, tune into your body, meditate. I feel like I'm on fire now. Sag just caught fire. Here we are. So yeah, the mystic side of things. Like I saw something, they're training or like doing an experiment in China with these little school kids with little bands on their heads with a light on it. And if the kids stop focusing in class, the teacher can tell. So they want you, like, this is going to be on the freaking Amazon workers, right? Are you concentrating on what you're doing? Like this, people go mad if they can't switch back and forth. And that's that Gemini thing again.
Yeah.
And Mercury, you have to switch back and forth, but many times a day between the conscious and that kind of dreamy sort of state, or you go mad. And so this shows immediately if someone switched out of that state, and they're doing it on these little kids.
Oh, that is just blowing my mind.
Yeah.
By the way, Vanessa, you are fully Sag with what you were saying. And
I was in my Sag
because you're making my brain pop. Let's remember. Let's go back. What you were saying, and right before the thing on the head, but like what's real, what's not.
What's real and how it makes you respond to it.
Yeah, let's remember when Mars was going through Gemini, it had several aspects to Neptune and Pisces. There was a Neptune and Pisces square.
Yes, there was a massive square was part of it. Exactly. Yeah. That was a real key to that transit.
The key part of the transit. Saturn Aquarius was a part of the transit that gave us some too. It's going back and forth. But the Mars Neptune deal, it was almost 3 times. It was 3 hits, I think it was. And
at the end, because at the end of like when Mars was going direct to retrograde from, I think it was 25. I'll give these, so it was between, was it 5 and 25 degrees or 8?
Yeah, it had to be in the later degrees. They're mutable. So there was a couple quickies at the end, or 2 hits.
Yeah. Since Mars goes so slowly when it's coming up to retrograde and then back, it just sat so slow through that square to Neptune, which would have been around 25-ish.
Yeah, 25, October 30th, 2022 is when Mars went retrograde at 25 degrees.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that was the first hit, and it wasn't until later, towards the end of the Mars transit, where then it made the other squares again with Neptune, to go back to what you're saying about what's real, what's not, and what was happening, and with social media and the messaging, and here's Neptune throwing its fantasy and fog and mutableness with no boundaries. The mind had no boundaries. Mars is pushing Gemini with no boundaries and getting blasted open. Anyway, to go back to what you said, it's interesting too, because I think here within the next 24 hours, currently Venus in Gemini is going to make this aspect with Neptune. If I'm correct here, I got to look at my ephemeris here, because did I get that right?
Neptune's now at 26. Venus is at 24.
It's Venus square Neptune. That's hitting, in the sense, these later degrees that Mars went over. Too, if we're doing a timeline thing, but definitely to go back to everything that you said about that, and then the tracking part of it all too. And most importantly, the beautiful place that you touched upon, Vanessa, that you instinctively knew, or that we knew what was off.
It's instinct. It's instinctively.
And I'm of this, not just mindset, life set, that it is inherent in us as human beings. We are all magicians. We're all witches.
Yes.
We're all there. We are constantly and always have the power and our connection to nature, which always is run through our senses.
Yeah.
And our senses have been changing and tested because of technology the last 50 years. And more so than now, that we are influenced literally by swiping and technology, that things are purposely done with how things, because they're touching chemicals in our brain, the serotonin hits, all that, and we are lost, and or we find ourselves trying to distinct what's real and what's not. And it goes back to inherently what you said, my beautiful Sag friend, that if you are, and you're listening and watching out there, it's great to have Gemini powers. Trust me, I know. And I could get in my head, and I'm really good at it. And I could juggle, and I'm a really good trickster for the good of things.
Yeah.
But I know if I get too in my head and too lost, that for me, I've learned that I have to I need to go for a walk, and I need to listen to the wind, and I need to touch something. I need to smell good food. I need to have my senses engaged with something real in nature to get myself back into my true self.
Yeah.
That right there is what magic is, astrological magic. It's alchemy. It will be the place, and it's your temple. And I want people to remember this because of what we're talking about and where we're going. If you're looking to come back to like something and real,
this is your birthright. I think this is the gift of having Taurus rising. I think that's what anchors you, and I know me. And yeah, madness is too far in the head. I think all this is driving people to madness, personally, too far down that road. So yeah, back in the body, Taurus rising style. And it's Taurus season now. So yeah.
It definitely is. It definitely is. We have Uranus and Taurus these days with the journey with this. We're going to have Jupiter enter Taurus here within weeks. It's a thing of like, I think a lot of times too, it goes back to a Venus thing. If we want to bring Venus in her ways, no matter what sign or aspect, she's in Gemini now and going to go Cancer, but to balance the byproduct of Mars, like we talked about earlier. But inherently, I think I just really like where you went, Vanessa. I'm all about like reintegration.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to, if it's a tool that's here to stay, and it is, we have to learn to use the tool and don't let it use us, because it's all programmed to use us and drive us. Like you said, it changes our wiring in our brain. It's driving behavior, and that's manipulative. You wouldn't take that from a human being.
Yeah, you're right. Totally.
Yeah, it's manipulating our behavior. So yeah, educating, and the other side of the communication axis, having education around these things so you understand what's happening and can maybe get a bit of a grip and claw your way back out.
Yeah, no, totally. On a personal level, because it was hitting all these Gemini planets I talked about from my live streams I was doing clients, I was at some points, I was in a zone. And then I had my own overheating. I took on way too much. My client base did way too many readings in a certain thing, and I wasn't functioning. I was just off. And the Mars, the engine of the chart, like where we get our energy. For me, it just no energy. And for me, I had my own personal lesson. I finally, after all these years of being a Gemini, found the extreme place I could go. Out of bounds, and crashed. Literally crashed. I mean, at
like
my body,
Elon's rocket.
Yep. Elon's rocket. Yep, I took it. But I almost knew. By the way, as someone, I will say I'm practicing person, ritualistic. I knew what was going on, but I did it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, sometimes you've got to take one for the team and social experiment.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But if I look at the other benefit side that was revealed to me personally, was I learned I leveled up, and I had a current, and I'm still doing this. I always will. Because remember, the other part of brain communication and all that is not necessarily talking or sending an email, all that. It's listening.
Yes.
And we forget about this sometimes when we're talking, that communication and talking, and even Gemini, it's silence and listening. That's the other part of it. And I know for me personally, I was like, I wasn't refined in my listening techniques, or and actually I took a course early this year to help me with this, and it was from January to March. And
Wow.
yeah, and I did this during, Mars and Gemini retrograde is when I did it. So I was learning more communicative techniques and more different types of ways of listening to clients, or in general help my communication skills. And I'm pretty
Great.
good at them. That
Perfect.
doesn't mean I'm like, it's always something to learn.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And
yeah,
it's a
but
different type. Like I've done counseling skills to support my astrology consults, and it's a different way of listening and responding. And then ours was transpersonal, so there was a lot of also listening into the body, and
yeah.
you're not just listening with your ears, you are receiving with lots of parts of yourself. So listening to the feedback from what your body's picking up, like I was saying, with that's how you can tell if something's real or not.
Yeah, to go back to what you said.
Yeah.
And again, so Geminis don't get a bad rap. Yeah, they can get stuck in their head, especially with the Mars and Gemini transit. But the other part of that is when one is breathing and using breath. Gemini energy is using breath through their lungs to move the energy out of their head, and you get to these places of listening, and then to what you said, like the more embodied approach, that you bring that balance. So it's okay to have Gemini energy, but yeah, we pushed it to the limits, and
That's
over
great. Good on
the
you.
edge. So
Right. And did you look at, were you watching the Mars and where it was transiting in your chart at the time where you just kind of crashed? Like, did you
oh
note where
yeah,
that was?
I actually did a live stream on purpose when it was on my sun, or no, it was on my Mercury or Sun on purpose. And I remember on purpose, I was in the middle I told everybody what was going on. Like, this is why I'm doing it. I think I put a bunch of stuff on the top of my chart too, is when I did it too. I forget what it was, but I actually, the chat was telling me at the time to slow down. And
Oh my gosh, that is
yeah, they were actually watching out for me because I prefaced the live stream. This is the reason why I'm doing it, and this is what I'm going to try to do. So
that's
they
great. I
were
love
like,
that. That's an experiment.
it's an experiment, but it took me a week. There was other stuff going on besides the live stream. I was like juggling, like I would maybe usually do, but because it was retrograde, I misconstrued everything. Even though I was in my magic going, let's see what I can do, I still, and I'm an astrologer, I know what's going on. And I crashed.
Yeah.
I literally crashed. Like my adrenals,
Yeah.
nervous system, definitely nervous.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I have noticed, like, I had lots of energy at the time, and it's just up to just before that eclipse that's just happened in Aries. So these eclipses hit off my chart quite a lot. That was conjunct my moons, reasonably wide, but not that wide. This bookending one is
The
across my
29-degree
ascendant.
one.
Oh, was it 29?
Yes, we had the 29-degree
Yeah, it
Aries.
was
Yeah,
29. Actually, no, it wasn't
Was
in,
it
it
zero? Was
wasn't
it
in all of
the
my mood.
equinox, or equinox, but the 0-degree new moon? I don't know. Anyway.
No, yeah, actually it wasn't. I think there was something. Anyway, recently I just was like, yeah, it's like I have nothing left in the tank. Like my adrenals are, have I had them removed by aliens? I don't know. But it's like totally like nothing there. It's like I'll drink a coffee and it doesn't even do anything. And that was very recent too, and I feel like it's the tail end of that retrograde. And because I had heaps of energy. I've had heaps of like, go fire energy all this time, and then bang. And I've heard a lot of people just crashing a little bit, the same thing.
Yeah,
it's interesting, and perfect timing for Taurus season, because it's the go slow season anyway. So I'm spending a bit more time having little strolls around nature and going to the beach for a minute and just taking time out to stretch.
yeah, and I noticed that on your feed a little bit that you do show. I noticed that, and I was like, oh, it looks. I was like, and here I am in the other hemisphere, and it's where I'm at. It's been cold and rainy. I'm looking at that, especially after a long transit. Like, I'm like, I want to go to the beach.
So beautiful. And one of the reasons I post it is to remind people. to connect, like, even though it's on the screen, it's because I like it when people post stuff like that. It's like, oh yes, it's so beautiful, and then that draws you into, I might go outside. So it's a reminder to people, and here's also some beauty, just looking at, they say looking at the blue and green of the sky and nature, because we're naturally so finely tuned for nature, you immediately relax.
Mm-hmm.
So here it is, here's the sun, here's the beach, not just showing off.
Yeah,
But
yeah, no,
maybe a little bit.
totally you, Vanessa. Like, I could see how people are like, oh, you're just being vivacious and big and whatever, but if people don't know you well enough now, there's the actually deeper intention with it all, and that's what I appreciate about you.
Yeah, it's the intention that drives anything that I do with astrology.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I love astrology for what it is, but the driver, the machine, like the engine, is the intentional. Like, I have missions to accomplish, and it's a good vehicle for those.
Yeah, totally. Like, that what you just said is interesting. This whole thing, the interaction with you and I today, is me being Gemini, you Sag, and like the interplay that goes on, and how we both roll. We do things differently, but it's like the end goal. What is it?
Exactly. I think a lot of
So,
people in astrology land are like that. A lot of very the magical side and the mystical side, but they're also academic and very bright and very curious and need that long form, because I think I was thinking about this yesterday, why it attracts so many like that, because astrology is that system for the academic part, but it's really mystical as well. And if you're not into both, it's not going to be an attractive thing for you. You're not going to go for it. So most astrologers I meet, I love it when it's like the boomer ones that are really old. They look so straight because it's hard to look cool when you're that old, but they are out there. Like, they're so interesting. They're really interesting people. And I don't think a lot of the younger ones realize that. And so, speaking of Mercury and Gemini, start off a conversation and you'll be so pleasantly surprised at how off the planet they actually are. It's great. There's so much to learn from them. But yeah, so I think I just take it for granted that most of us are kind of like that. Like, I love the astrology community. It's like, I find it hard to really find people in where I live at the moment that really I can engage with and really relate to, like, really. And because I'm not living in a big city at the moment, but in the astrology world, like, it's like my people. It's great when people aren't fighting.
yeah.
But
No.
yeah, and I think the Pluto and Libra ones are like, maybe we're less likely to fight. I'm feeling, this is a tangent, but I'm going to say it to you because we're the same year. I just wrote an article on Pluto going into Aquarius and how that's going to pick up or activate our Pluto in Libra. So we're picking up the trine, which is an awesome life stage for us. And I can feel it, damn it. Like, we've got very early Plutos, right? Like, mine's at 1 degrees Libra. And
Yeah,
it's
you're
so
switch.
activated.
I'm late Virgo. In that year, it's
Yours
switch.
retrograded. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
no, it hadn't even
Yeah.
gone in yet.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
there's people younger than me that also have the Virgo, because it retrograded back into Virgo after it hit Libra. So I can feel it. So you're in the trine now. You're firing, which is true, actually. And I can feel the Libra really activated. Like, I'm at like a peak of mediation at the moment. And that's part of the responsibility. Like, I feel like, you know what, this is way too out of control and we need to pull it back together. I love this community. There's no need for all of this, the wider world. And so I've been really thinking a lot about how can I word this? How can I find a way to balance this stuff? Like, how does that work? And yeah, it's been very entertaining for myself to do that and experiment. You can experiment online. Sometimes I type little things in places where I think that people will have a hard time with that, but I'll make it all, like, I'm not going to fight with anyone. I'm not going to be mean to people. It's more like, just lay something down really neutral with a sort of a positive spin and see how that goes. It's very, I love the experimental side.
You would throw a good party. I know
I
you
do.
would.
I do throw good parties. I do
Yeah, I
parties.
think I think it's for everyone to feel better. It's total Libra talk too, of like having a way of using style and grace and harmony for even those to still be their individualistic selves and speak their mind and their opinions or whatever without it being
Just
blown
how
up. Or
you do it. Yeah,
it's
you
how you
need to
do
have the
it.
conversation. And
Yeah.
that's another thing that's missing. You need to have the conversation, but you need to learn how to freaking have it, and maybe when's the right time for that. And but yeah, how to do it. And I think that's missing. It's just so polarized, and that's
Yeah.
that's our axis as well. Is that let's have the conversation.
I think too, we can bring into this just because we're talking about this whole thing of exchange and communication.
Mm.
And, right now, whether you're hearing us on a podcast, right? And you can hear our voice and fluctuations, like the way I talk, the way Vanessa talks. And then if you're watching the video, you can kind of gauge maybe a little bit of our body language. But what happens in person? Where again your senses, you're able to have all the different ways of
So much
communicating with
more,
each other.
yeah.
And part of the challenges that happen with comment sections and all this stuff is not being able to see, or through text messages, it's in your personal life. I had somebody recently I was talking to, like, you didn't answer back with the emoji was this. I'm like, I just
Yes.
answered back. And it's like, and everyone's in their own bubble with this, and there's like all these
Yes.
different etiquettes, but we're not be able to see each other, we're not able to gauge with each other in these other ways, and so miscommunication arises, hence arguments on the internet and comments.
Yes.
You can't see, it's this whole thing. And it's like, yeah, go back, technology's here and moves forward, but like, how can we bring back the listening in those other ways? How can we find that space that you were talking about, that you create sometimes, Vanessa, like in your posts or what you're writing, to bring in these things, to find a way for whatever community one's in to connect again, at least, and to have the scary, possibly unwanted conversation. And because honestly, if we are going to move forward, whether it's in our personal lives or relationships or with family or bigger dynamics in community, and there's definite polarization, it's like we either get farther separated apart, or we have to find a way.
We take control and learn how to use this stuff so we're not being used by it. And that's a really good point to make. Like, Instagram won't let me do emojis anymore for some reason. So it's just a lack of that. I don't know.
Really?
It's like copy and paste them from somewhere else.
Oh,
so,
right.
Yeah. And that's part of this learning thing, is like, well, how do I find a voice that's going to translate in this medium? So that's one of the sort of things I've been practicing and thinking about as well, because it's different. I'm a really physical person, and I communicate very visually as well, and you just lose all of that. So being aware of how you're coming across, and it is learning a new way of communicating. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Vanessa, I just some of the things you said here too. Like, I just definitely, when we're done, I'm gonna be thinking about too, like my messaging, because I'm coming from a place too of intention, from a place of divine love in the end, and that it's always all around us, whether we see it or not. And we know this when we work with clients or in what other modalities people are using. We find ourselves back in this place, and then you remember, like, oh yeah. Like, yes, and can we use technology too, what's happening, the changes, and come from that place, and find a way to balance it all.
And make it more useful. It's so true. And just sort of you can always turn it and take a leadership. You can always try to take the leadership with things. And if you don't have to bite and respond and let someone else control the frame, you can come in and neutralize things a little bit, and that mediation thing. And maybe that's for my generation with the Pluto in Libra to do. I don't know, but I kind of feel like that's my niche at the moment, because I don't want to buy into the nasty stuff. It's just why? It's not worth it. Life's precious, and before you know it, it's over. So make it make it great.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one way.
Looking at taking some perspective.
Yep. Huh. Yeah, I'm glad we kind of found ourselves at this place where basically we're enveloped by divine love, Vanessa. that it's all, we're being hopeful
Yeah.
and inspiring,
Exactly. I wouldn't have it any
so,
other way. So I think
yeah.
I also think this is a great natural kind of way to land the conversation. I'm really glad that it's come to this point as well. So I think that we should wrap it up. Is there anything
Yes.
else that you want to bring to the chat?
You and I could talk. We could
Yeah,
go.
no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My world, is YouTube and my Sparkles of Gold channel on YouTube. Of course, is my world, my website, sparklesofgold.com, my consultation process practice. I just agreed to do a lecture later on this year for the Washington State Astrological Association in person.
Great. In person.
In
Yes.
person. Yeah. I'm on Instagram, but I'm really focused, at least with like my messaging, on YouTube, and that's where you can find me. You go to my page. I just did a live stream yesterday during Mercury Kazemi. Speaking of that, and I rehashed the month of May. I also, once a month on YouTube, I have a live call-in show.
I
And
like that. Very Gemini. That's great.
yep, I put a phone number up on the screen, and people call anonymously, and I talk about a part of the chart on air for like 10 minutes.
I love
So
that.
that's my world. That's what I'm doing. And I'm all coming from a place that is, yes, I'm Gemini and I'm quick and I'm intuitive, but I am Taurus rising. And in the end, I'm Venus ruled.
Yes.
That's who I am.
Exactly. Well, Sparkles, thanks for having the conversation. I loved it. You had lots of great points. Love that we ended up here. Go check out Nicholas, aka Sparkles of Gold. And of course, I've been Vanessa. Yes.
Yes, I was about to say, Vanessa, in case people are going to hear on my channels, what about you?
So I'm Vanessa Montgomery, aka Astro All-Starz with a Z, and you can find me at astroallstars.com. Astro All-Starz on Instagram. I'm quite active. Come look at my beach sunsets. And I write the horoscopes for Glamour magazine weekly, and although they're very light, I think they're quite good, so check them out. I've got 3 books out so far: Star Power, Cosmic Power, and Astro Power in the Power trilogy, Power series. Hopefully one more to finish that one off, but I haven't got anything signed yet. And open for readings also, and general chats. Trying to put a bit more on my YouTube. I do have a podcast as well, which I think I'll put this on. I think this is pretty good.
Oh,
that'll be on there. Yeah,
cool. Nice.
I like it. I like it.
Nice.
I like it a lot. So come see me, go see Sparkles, and check out what we're doing. Let us know what you thought. And of course, we're the axis of communication. We want to hear from you. So, what happened with your chart? What are your observations on all of this? What do you think about the looming future with all this generative AI stuff? It's hardcore. We might be looking for a job soon. Hire us. I might be doing a hairdressing apprenticeship. The trades will be safe.
Yeah, maybe I got to go find a piece of land in the woods and just kind of.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yes.
Just me and my garden.
And the rest of the astrology community.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well,
good to connect with you, Vanessa.
Yeah, you too, Sparkles. Yeah. Stay cosmic, everyone, and have a great Taurus season.